Hi, I'm Greg Rice, and you're listening to the Game Maker's Notebook. Today, I'll be talking with Will Todd and James Carbutt of Cole Supper in Yorkshire, the creators of Thank Goodness You're Here. We'll talk about this comedy slapformer, watching cartoons growing up, humor in games, and working with the amazing comedian Matt Berry.
Oh, hello there, young man.
Thank goodness, thank goodness.
Thank goodness you're here. If you're looking for something to do.
I've been sucking this pipe all morning. And then I realised it's yours with
Ah, Bessie's sick as a pig.
with no meat.
Now, you've got to wait for that useless locksmith.
Larry.
Lawrence! Solid! Rod!
Oh, you're messing about with that thing, are you?
You can start by getting on that mower. Don't you come back here until those hands are clutching his meat.
Well, thanks for joining us here today, guys. Huge fan of your games. I'm excited to dig in on them. Yeah, guys, I'd love to hear about how you got into games, like some of the first games you played, what drew you to wanting to make video games.
Yeah, I think as a kid, I always came up with little fantasy worlds in my head, like smashing bits of Lego together, that kind of thing. And I guess what was my first experience with games was probably do you have what's like a wacky warehouse? You have Chuck E. Cheese, right? That's a thing where they have video games in the Chuck E. Cheese, like cabinets that has Spyro the Dragon on. I think it was that. I was playing PS1 games, and eventually I got the PS1, and I was I don't know, just like all little kids when you get PS1, just all about it. And I think from then on, the making games was the focus of this sort of, I don't know, creating things. I sort of knew I wanted to do games, and I was pretty fortunate in that the more I learned about what making games is, and it's actually a lot of complicated work of engineering and art, and not just coming up with ideas and telling people when you've got it right. The more I kind of actually wanted to do it, the more I enjoyed the process of engineering and stuff. And James, you didn't want to go into games at all, right?
I'm still at my doubts, honestly. No, I wasn't there. I did animation and illustration at uni and stuff. But I was always into games and stuff, but not as much as Will, I don't think. I think, a lot of the, Thank Goodness You're Here and The Good Time Gardening came out of us two just wanting to do something together. And that's we just happened to have complementary skills that result in a video game. But in terms of I think I wasn't really allowed video games when I was super young. So my first console, I think, was a PS2 or maybe a Game Boy SP. So I remember playing Simpsons Hit and Run and absolutely loving it. And then playing GTA and being oh my God, this is Simpsons Hit and Run ripoff. And then realizing later on that it was the other way around. But yeah, I used to love that game. And then Simpsons Road Rage was another big one too. Mainly Simpsons-based gaming when I was a kid.
Very Simpsons-oriented.
Very Simpsons-coded. But yeah, it was good. I also loved The Simpsons, so.
The location and setting of this game is so important to the game. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about where you're from and how that fed into the game?
Sure. Do you want to take this one, Will?
Sure, yeah. So we're from Barnsley, which is a town of the north of England, former mining town. And that's about all it's got going for it, really. No, I don't know. No, it's interesting. We sort of started the original concept for Thank Goodness quite a ways away from the town, and it was this sort of strange, visually driven, idealized town, almost like Americana originally, I think, right, James?
Yeah, definitely. There was definitely at some point a ski lift for some reason in some of the sketches.
But as we started putting stuff down and developing characters, because we thought it was going to be partially character driven, but sort of more moody and atmospheric. And then as we started getting writing in, the characters just sounded like us because that's what we sound like. Or they sounded like they were from the north of England because that's what we sound like. So space we were kind of like creating felt more and more like our hometown until eventually we thought let's just phone it in almost and set it, purposefully in Barnsley. We abstract it a bit, but it's like Barnsworth.
Yeah.
It's this sort of imagined version of the town. But ultimately, yeah,
I don't
it's
think we ever
about
decided
this
either.
place.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it has a ton of personality charm. It comes across as being a real place and being informed by a real place. I'm curious about, I know there's like settings in the game for turning on like proper English versus Yorkshire English and things like that. I'm wondering about those kind of colloquialisms. And as you develop the game, seeing those layer in, how much that kind of informed if you were in the right direction or how the comedy was hitting.
Yeah, I think that like the UI stuff that we switched into like dialect at the end, that was like really a last minute decision, wasn't it? Like we'll say, is we never really set out to make like the Northern English game or whatever. We just got closer and closer, and then we went further and further into it until like by the end it was completely incomprehensible.
It sounds like that's because you're drawing from, your life and things like that too. But are there characters in there that really are like, oh, this is the town's like drunk, or this is the locksmith that we know from around the corner, or things like that?
Yeah, there isn't really one in there that's like a 1-for-1 of someone we knew like growing up or anything. I'm trying to think of examples. I think they all kind of just pull from like characters that we like growing up with and known and stuff. Like, I don't know, Jasper, like the Scottish handyman, for whatever reason, his appearance is like informed by like my old PE teacher, who was old when he taught like my mum, and then he taught us. So he was like, we called him Speedy Reedy, and like guys like that, just like because just like the appearance and stuff is like in a lot of the characters. But I don't think there's anyone in there that's like a 1-for-1. Can you think of any, Will?
No, I don't think so. Maybe the worm is just me. I think, yeah, it's a common question. But I think like we sort of, I don't know if the characters are even like archetypes. They're definitely not like any one particular person. I think basically every character comes out of just us doing a silly voice, and the bits we're doing to each other are always hopefully new. There was a lot of anxiety for most of production that we just sort of like ripped off SpongeBob somehow. We were just like quoting like our old childhood cartoons back to each other, and we'd just be found out. But hopefully that hasn't happened.
Yeah. Have you found people, like, what's the response from locals to the game? Have people played it, and do they have thoughts about it?
Oh, we're not allowed back in Barnsley anymore. They
No,
love it,
that wasn't
actually.
Yeah, that was an anxiety we had. We were like, oh, I really hope people don't feel like we're punching down, because that's, it's the complete opposite. But yeah, no, from experience, like, people from the town seem to like it. I had a very surreal moment where I was recognised in a sort of cafe on the outskirts of Barnsley. I was out for brunch with my mum, and some guy was like, "Oh, dude, thank goodness you're here." And now she finally thinks I've got a real job. It was a real privilege.
And that was the purpose of making the game. So all is succeeded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figure you guys probably have like the key to the city at this point, or something, or like lunch with the mayor, or something like that.
That would rule. It would rule to have lunch with the mayor, and he looks exactly like the mayor in the game. Right,
Totally.
yellow.
Awesome. Well, let's go back a bit. I played a bit of the Good Time Garden too, and you can see a lot of what you did with Thank Goodness You're Here starting to bloom there in terms of art style, even like slap as the main action. So I'd love to hear more about that game as well, and how that kind of fed into what you wanted to do with Thank Goodness You're Here.
Yeah, that was another weird one. Like, we sort of like took a stab at making a game a few times before, and for whatever reason it never quite stuck. I think there was always like, our skills were maybe lacking a little bit. But then that one fateful day many moons ago where James came around to my place, and we sort of sat down, and we just like tried to get the walk cycle out right. It was just like the little goblin guy with his wang out. We got him moving around, and it just sort of like felt satisfying in that moment as soon as everything came together, and that was enough to like keep us going for what ended up being almost a year part time. But that was very much again like a we didn't have like the clear vision right at the start. It was very much an exploration, and we had a lot of ideas for what it was going to be along the way. We had like, all right, this guy's he's going to go do this, this, and that. He's getting food on this big long mission to feed his family or something. But we just started like throwing stuff in, and then what we'd done kind of had to stick because we'd done it, and we were doing this around our day jobs otherwise, so we couldn't really afford to throw too much out. So it was just kind of the product of this like winding path, and eventually sort of like landed on the finished product, which thankfully seems as if it was designed with some big original intent.
We were I can't express enough how little we thought about that game as we like went through it. Like the other day, I went home and I like uncovered a piece of like A4 paper where we've clearly just decided like the characters that are in it just like on a whim, just because it's none of them are crossed out or anything. So it's just an A4 piece of paper that says like Mushroom Boy, Vine Guy, and then Boob Guys brackets funny, and then like somehow that came together to make a game.
Amazing. Yeah, where did the slap as the main action come from? I mean, it's essentially just like an interact button, but it provides a lot more humor and kind of potential for unexpected reactions. So I'm curious how that started and how you decided to continue to incorporate that into Thank Goodness You're Here.
I think it was informed partially by the Good Time Garden, because like slapping things in that world was very satisfying and like quite funny. And then originally we were going to have a bunch more like verbs. Like I think you could pick stuff up at one point. And I can't remember if there's any other ones, but you're going to be able to like slap and pick stuff up just like kind of in the Good Time Garden. But I don't know. We got rid of it. I think it just boils it down to like the simplest, like way of playing the game. And it's also a nice meaty like interact button. I think you put it one day, Will. So like it's like I don't know. It's also just like immediately funny to just slap someone's shins.
Yeah.
I don't remember where that initial. I don't remember where that initial idea came out of. I think it's just, I think because a lot of the designs in the Good Time Garden were just like butt cheeks, and it was like, well, okay, it follows that you'd slap them, it's like it gives you this sort of like immediate like kinesthetically satisfying way of prompting a response out of something, and it sort of makes sense that like you give something a smack and it goes, oh, I think that carried forward, and it just kind of made sense to keep rolling with that into Thank Goodness. And like James says, we had initial designs on like a lot more complex set of verbs. Like you could pick up things. I think it was like an inventory at one point, or at least you could pick up items and then carrying around and have just one at a time. But implementing that in practice across a bunch of these different what we call panels, which are like the unique camera perspectives that range from top down to side on to the character being smaller or larger depending on context. We kind of struggle to figure out how if he picks up a watering can at one side of the world and he can drop it anywhere else, how do we design for that? And ultimately it just made sense to sort of like distill it down just to the slap and prompting responses out of characters instead of expecting the player to like manage a bunch of items and a more complex set of verbs.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can get out of just a single action like that. Like it's just a slap, but it's different every time, right? Curious about art style as well. Like the game has such a striking visual. It has a thing I love in games where if you look at a picture of it, it has a very unique look of its own. Doesn't look like anything else. So curious what you were pulling from and kind of what the thought was behind the visuals in the game.
Yeah, I think that just came from kind of like, I don't know, like my sort of illustration style and stuff is very much informed by like Carbutt stuff. Like I watched a lot of Adventure Time and those kinds of shows. So all that kind of stuff was in my head at the time. But then along the way, as it got kind of more British, we got more informed by like these old comics in the UK called like the Beano, where it's like these knobbly kneed, like characters with like who are super skinny and have like these huge bulbous noses and like bulbous eyes and stuff. And it's that kind of stuff also looked a bit like these like weird horny postcards that you can get in the UK or have typically got in the past, where it's just like it's a bunch of like innuendos and stuff, and that like lent more into the cheekiness of the game and stuff. So that like inspired a bunch of stuff as well. And then there's also like this strange these cards, these like seaside postcards are always in this Toby Carvery, which is like a chain of restaurants in the UK that sells like just like meat and gravy and stuff, and they're always like inexplicably on the wall, and I always found it hilarious how they were just like very on the nose innuendos for no particular reason. But yeah, all that stuff tied it in to make it feel like more British, I guess.
Yeah. There's something too about the just like the brush width is like very consistent, right? And it makes it feel like you're almost drawing with a marker. Oh, did I just pick up on something you were hoping?
Yes. You just made my day.
Well, tell me about it.
That was I was absolutely draconian with the stroke width, and actually
He was a
some of it still
tyrant.
upsets
You would
me
not
to this
believe.
day. Yeah.
I'm glad I picked up on it.
Yeah. No, it's very important. I think like aesthetic rules or whatever to stick to those to make it just otherwise it sort of betrays the world in a way, and you kind of become like more aware of it being a video game, which in video games is very hard because there's so many limitations, technical or otherwise. So you're always running into these kind of things. So it's like for me, it's like the visual version of like an invisible wall, you know.
Yeah, it almost also makes it feel handmade, right? In a way, it almost feels like you're painting it all with the same ballpoint pen or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I guess the other thing I obviously see is just cartoons, right? So it feels very heavily inspired by cartoons and the pacing in a children's cartoon. So are there certain shows you might have watched and pulled from? Was that intentional?
I'll let you go, Will.
You already called out Adventure Time, but yeah.
Sure, yeah. I guess the obvious, like Jim says, the CalArt sort of school of cartoons. But I think tonally, we always try to like follow our noses and not really feel like we were emulating any like one thing. I think there's maybe a tendency in games to do like, oh, we're referencing this explicit artist or like this sort of like genre or whatever. We wanted to maybe not even like deliberately escape that. It just wasn't necessarily what we were trying to like go for. And I think, totally we're more like influenced by things like Carry On films, specifically these horny seaside postcards. I can't emphasize like how much that affected like the whole thing, how much they're all consistently on the moot board. And then things like Reeves and Mortimer, a lot of like live action comedy stuff like Surrealist, kind of sketch shows, or Big Reeves' Big Night Out was the big one, like early in production. I sort of like in one night binged like the entire like 2-series box set of Big Reeves' Big Night Out, and I kind of came in the next morning and was like, well, what about this? And if there's only one thing we can point to, it's more that than any other like visual references, because James just has his own sort of very distinct style, and the sort of Coal Supper house style we've gone with.
You call out Adventure Time, and you talk about how this is a bit inspired by, cartoons. I'm wondering if there's specific cartoons you grew up watching or kind of like the era of cartoons that you guys experienced. But I guess I just generally felt the kind of Saturday morning cartoon vibe that we have here in the US. And I'm not sure if it's the same in the UK or where that's coming from.
Yeah, I think if there's a particular era of cartoons, it's not actually the ones we grew up watching, because we grew up watching like, British cartoons and, but also like a lot of American cartoons, because that's, where most of them came from. So like Ed, Edd and Eddy was like a big one that I used to watch. But I wouldn't say the game was inspired too much by those kind of shows. And it's more inspired by like the stuff that our parents would watch growing up, which is really weird, like puppetry. Like there's Bagpuss, which is a great one about like I don't know what the story is for Bagpuss. It's a cat that lives with a mouse or something in an antique shop, and then
it's like a lost and found like cabinet shop thing. And every day, this girl Emily, she'll find stuff and she'll put it in the shop, and then all the toys, and like Bagpuss is this weird old cat, and then there's like a nightstand or a book stand that's a bird, and then like a Raggedy Ann doll, and then a bunch of mice and a church organ. It's honestly incredible. That was like there's one bit with like chocolate biscuits that's like only real ones will remember, but that just has me in hysterics every single time, and that like probably informs my humor more than anything else.
Yeah. No, I think for me, it's just something about the pacing, right? Like a lot of adventure games, and I'd say this is someone who made adventure games and loves adventure games, but pacing can be slow, right? You often hit these like puzzle challenges or sticky parts of the game where the narrative can kind of slow. But with this game, I felt like there was a flow and it kind of kept moving and the jokes came rapidly and quickly. And it felt more like the pacing of a children's cartoon in that it had momentum to it. And I wondered how much, iteration it took to get to that point where players weren't getting stuck or lost or slowing things down.
Yeah, I think we knew because we didn't have sort of a mechanical hook. The thing that players kept players going was like, what's next kind of thing. So we always tried to like every corner you turn, you'd see something new. That was very intentional. And I think right at the start, we had Illusions of Grandeur and the whole thing was going to be like 14 hours long and like chock full of these bits. And then we did some simple sums, which is like 1 week's worth of work equals 1 character. 200 characters equals, oh no. So like we figured out pretty soon that we couldn't do that. So that's why it's sort of, at some point we decided to forfeit length and make it short but dense. And we figured that way it doesn't outstay its welcome too, and it's a bit more like a film. Because I mean, the whole thing paces like a cartoon and a film anyway. So
totally. Well, I felt good that it seemed to acknowledge my time, and yeah, it's nice because it just kept the flow going. It never felt like things were halting or the story was pausing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about humor in games. I think a lot of people would say writing isn't necessarily the strong suit of video games, and humor is even probably something less often attempted. But you guys totally nailed it. There's like funny jokes and things all over this game. Curious what challenges you faced in trying to find humor in the game and how much kind of iteration it took, what your process looked like there.
Yeah, it's it is a good one, and I think for us, like there wasn't any like easy answer. Like in terms of like the process, we would just like start with like the gag. So we'd be like, I don't know, we'll just do like what's a classic one we just quote back and forth, James? I think it's all sort of like been exercised post-release now.
The
but like,
maybe is a good one. I said £2.50 for parking. Actually, the ones that we find funny, no one else likes.
Yeah, I think by the end of it, it was like very inside baseball, and we're just doing stuff explicitly for each other. I mean, we're doing that the entire time, really. But by the end of it, it was just like no one's going to find this funny, and a lot of stuff probably just got cut because it was nonsense. But I think I don't know, like stuff like the family arguing about the size of the pie and the big enough. Big enough. Not at my dinner table, that kind of thing. We'd just like be in the office like saying that to each other and I don't know, sort of almost like refining it by this weird manic call and response game. And then eventually when it gets time to implementing that, then we have to figure out how that becomes like an interactive sequence and how that works as this complicated clockwork of animating bits of thing in Engine. So I think it's just having the approach with the writing literally at the forefront. Like it was never like, okay, here's like a level, and then these characters have to talk to each other to get some mission critical bit of info. Hand that off to someone who has to then like punch that up or add flavor, but that could be rewritten at any given point. I think that's seems to be the challenge in for writing in games. Typically, is you're juggling the sort of functional requirements of the thing, whereas for us it was always like the joke is the thing, and everything else is sort of like in service of that. So to anyone else who wants to make a game like this, first off, probably don't. It's too hard. But if you are going to do that, you have to like look to the writing first before trying to like stick that on top of anything else.
Yeah, and I think we also like. The trouble is if you present a game as like, this is a game that's just like jokes start to finish, that also will probably wear thin fast. So we kind of have the illusion of a game almost in like the storylines and like your tasks to help the townsfolk, and that kind of like affords the humor as well. So it's a weird like trade.
Yeah. Well, now I'm curious, what are some of your favorite gags
in the game?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all the ones that like no one seems to. The ones that are just like completely off the wall.
Maybe you can explain them to us on the. It's never a good thing if you have to explain.
This is the secret. there's no like logic behind a lot of this stuff. It's just kind of what I think underpinning a lot of our sense of humor is saying something that sort of sounds like it should make sense, but then doesn't quite. Because ultimately, humor is about like indirection, right? You sort of you laugh at something because your brain is really good at like guessing what's coming next. It's like a prediction engine type thing, and then when that's subverted, it kind of creates this spasmodic response. Yeah, I don't know, because you something happened that you weren't expecting, and you energy is like kind of redirected into that. So I think I don't know. For us, humor is just like it's leveraging that. It's just like saying something that like it's subverting expectation while also it has the air of making sense, but it just doesn't at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good segue too. And I know you guys did a bunch of the VOA. I can recognize your voices in the game just from this. But I also hear a very recognizable voice that I think does this very well, which is the wonderful Matt Berry showing up in this game. And he has a thing where it's not even the jokes are kind of unexpected. It's like his way of delivery, just the emphasis he puts on a syllable or the pattern of speech is just funny in its own right too.
Yeah, that was a weird one because, like, on the call, we sort of flippantly decided he should do a northern accent. So we were actually doing the lines to him, feeding him the lines in our accent, so he knew what the accent sounded like, and then he'd do it back. So we were like doing impressions of him to him, doing an impression of us. It was bizarre. So the whole like him going like fertilizer. We'd have to like listen to him say fertilizer weird, then say it in a northern accent, then say it back so he could say it back to us. It was insane.
Yeah, that's amazing. How did that all come about, and what was it like working with him?
It was a weird one.
Publisher, the publisher organized it as a sort of little treat for us, I suppose. They were like, "What would be like a cool thing we could get you?" And be like, a cameo, a voice actor, just like some celebrity doing a bit part, maybe. And it was sort of in the works for quite a while, and then it came around all of a sudden and required like a lot more of his time. So we had to recast him and then also write a whole bunch more material. So I don't know. I think some good stuff came out of that, some not so good stuff in terms of our material. But then on the call, it was just like, it was incredible because we sort of, like James says, figured out what the accent was going to be, and then he'd just do it exactly how we had it in our heads. With basically every voice actor, we were pretty tyrannical. We knew what it was supposed to sound like, so we'd give a lot of direction. But with Matt, he just like had it just perfect every time. Until by the end of it, it was like this incredible like call and response where like James says, he was doing the line, and then Matt would like do it exactly how we wanted it, but in Matt Berry doing a Yorkshire accent voice, which is the good news.
Awesome. Well, it turned out hilarious. You guys made a wonderful game. It's available now to play on all your favorite consoles and PC, I believe. So please do go and get it. Thanks for joining us, guys. Is there any final word of wisdom you would like to leave us with, or some story that you left out that you think the world needs to hear?
Never put a shrew in a shoe. That's my advice.
Awesome. Lovely. Well, thank you so much, and have a good one. Good luck with the rest of the game.
Thank you.
Cheers, Greg. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.